The UFO Channel.
Okay, you see that color?
Yeah. That's not a plane.
No. Oh, no.
That's not a boat.
No, that's a
So
ship.
let's thank them for coming.
Wow, and it's above the sea
Please
level.
turn off your night scope, Charles. Off.
Some of the light coming off right now.
Someone's infrared or whatever.
Yeah, that's Charles.
Oh, whoa.
Oh, here they come.
What you have just heard, I would say a handful of people on Earth know, even in classified projects. It's highly compartmented. This is really way past TS-SCI, top secret special compartmented intelligence. I'm working now to try to bring this information and, more equally importantly, the technologies that are behind these spacecraft and things that are being reported on CNN now, because what the public isn't being told is that we have in fact figured out how those objects operate, and that would give us an entirely new and advanced civilization where we would not need fossil fuels, oil or gas or coal or nuclear power. So it's a very big story. Most people think the secrecy around this is because the government has just been incompetent. That's not true. That narrative is a false narrative. The true narrative is that, I will quote from a top secret memo released during the past few decades, but it was dated 1951, and it stated that the subject was the most classified matter in the US government, exceeding the classification of the development of the hydrogen bomb. I'm quoting. So a lot of people think this is about aliens. I said, no, it's not about ETs. It's about humans, and how are humans going to get out of the conundrum we're in, which is a very serious problem, and move forward as a civilization instead of sliding backwards. The public thinks that, God is in heaven and everything is in orbit and everything is, we actually are living in a situation where the extreme secrecy Eisenhower warned us about, the worst of that has come to fruition. And frankly, no one is reporting that, certainly not the mainstream news media. This is not just the United States, by the way. The same situation exists in Great Britain, Australia. I've met with ministers of defense in most of the Five Eyes countries, which are, of course, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Great Britain, US. I think this is the part of the story that people have a hard time, in a sense, getting their minds around, because we all grew up with our history lessons and our civics lessons, and the president is the commander in chief and blah, blah, blah. In reality, the emperor has no clothes, and there are classified projects that go on, unfortunately, that are not supervised by the president or the Congress. And actually, the CIA director's wife, who at the time was the chief operating officer of the National Academy of Sciences, said to me during our 2 or 3 hour meeting with the CIA director, she turned to me, she said, how are these civilizations communicating across the vastness of interstellar space? Because the speed of light is too slow. And for people who aren't scientists on your viewership, let me explain. At the speed of light, to go 1% of the way across our own galaxy, the Milky Way, would take, which is 1,000 light years, which is the distance light goes at 186,000 miles every second for a year. That's 1 light year. 1,000 light years is 1% of the way across our galaxy, which is one galaxy amongst trillions. But at the speed of light, for you to even communicate and say, hey, how are you doing? And to answer back, that would be the time since the birth of Christ, 2,000 years, for that transmission to happen with what you and I are using right now on electromagnetic signals. So we knew as scientists, and that there had to be something else that these civilizations were using. And what we discovered was that they have very sophisticated electronics. And this is, of course, what Elon Musk at Neuralink, he has a company called Neuralink, is working on, that interface with directed thought. Now, this is probably where I've lost half your audience. And they're going, what? What we had discovered is that, in fact, these civilizations that are from various star systems have technologies that Elon Musk could only dream about. In other words, they very accurately transmit and send and receive directed quanta of thought instead of an electromagnetic signal per se, through what's called field consciousness. And the consciousness field
is, I mean, it sounds very Buddhist or Vedic, but the consciousness field is actually not bound by space or time. And because of that, there's no limit on the speed of it. It's instantaneous because of what's called non-locality in physics. Is a bit obtuse and technical to get into probably here, but what non-locality means is that it's not based in the speed, the linear speed of light or the linear speed of sound or what have you. It's instantaneous because of the nature of conscious field, the field of consciousness. This is, to me, the most interesting stuff, because this whole science of consciousness is actually the big science for the next 1,000 years, but we have to catch up to the last 70 to 100 years of energy and propulsion technologies that have been hidden away so we don't destroy the biosphere. Why are we still using jet engines from the 30s, 40s, 50s, or rockets from the 40s? I'm saying because the alternative would completely terminate the petrodollar system and oil and gas and coal and nuclear power and public utilities. All of it is redundant, completely unnecessary. Tesla actually had a prototype car that was pulling energy out of the environment, and he didn't really understand what that was. We do now. It's called zero-point energy or quantum vacuum energy. But basically, just for people who are non-scientific, if you visualize a coffee cup, the amount of space inside that cup has enough energy to boil off all the oceans of the planet in its potential. And it's called the zero-point energy field. It's been quantified. It was in academic papers in the 50s, so-called Professor Casimir effect. But Tesla stumbled across this way back, early 20s, I believe, maybe before. But JP Morgan said, look, if we can't put a meter on it, we don't want it. So Tesla died a very bitter man. I always joke that Elon Musk doesn't have a Tesla that he's manufacturing. He has a Musk. And the reason I say that sort of jokingly is that a true Tesla would never have to be plugged into the grid. It would be pulling energy out of this state of energy that's around us through very high voltage systems. They're called VHV, very high voltage systems that create an opening into that energy field. And Tesla did enough experimentation with these sort of very high voltage systems at certain resonant frequencies, cycles per second, hertz, that he broke into that area of science, but no one wanted it to come out. Now, fast forward 100 years later, we're still burning gasoline in engines and rocket fuel and jets. And that's a tragedy for the human race, but it's a tragedy for the planet, and it's a tragedy for our children and my 9 grandchildren. So my concern is, the future. The past is the past, but we have to figure out how to catch up sort of back to the future. It's like that cartoon show, The Jetsons, when they showed people flying around in these cars. When that cartoon was made, those technologies were already developed. They're not going to say, A, we know what these are. B, we know where they come from. C, we figured out how they work. Let me give you a date that's going to probably curl your toes. October 1954. That was the date we mastered gravity control. Now, what do I mean by gravity control? What I mean by gravity control are high voltage systems that cause an object to what looks like levitate or move the way that vehicle that you saw in that video released by the Pentagon this week. And they confirmed, yes, this is real footage. And they released 3 different videos. What they didn't say, because the people releasing it don't know this, because of the compartmentalization, is that there is an unacknowledged compartmented program that began studying this in the 40s and 50s, and by 1954 had figured out how those things operate.
That's why, when Nikola Tesla died, the FBI swooped into his apartment and confiscated all of his secret papers. How do I know this? I have a document from the Department of Defense demanding that the FBI turn them over and names them for what they are, the secret papers of Nikola Tesla. This is not an urban myth. I have that document. It came in this cache of documents I'm talking about. You're conscious and awake. You go to sleep at night. You awaken in a lucid dream where you're flying. And that dream ends up being precognitive. You see something that happens the next day or the next week or the next year. This is a lucid precognitive dream. How many people have had one at some point in their life? Most humans have, although most scientists won't admit to it because they don't want to be discredited. Just like the Aboriginals had dream time as a routine way that they communicated at night in Australia. You know that story. And that's how they would know what to do the next day. They'd meet a friend in the outback and they know where to intersect at some remote area because they did it during their dream. Well, you could do that. If you can do it 10 miles away, you can do it a billion light years away. Because you've transcended space-time limitation. We can remote view, we can see the future, see the past, and of course the masters and rishis of old could teleport, materialize, dematerialize, etc. So all conscious, higher intelligent life forms have the ability to manifest in ways that an interstellar, transdimensional extraterrestrial civilization can't. This is lesson number one. It's a hard lesson. It's a really deep one. Now let's talk about remote viewing. Everybody's heard of remote viewing. CIA programs, DARPA, DIA. I know a lot of these guys. Well, that's the ability to be a seer and use consciousness to see something at a remote distance or a remote point in space-time. This is the part that you're not going to hear and see in Hollywood. That's what you're going to hear about today. Is actually a level or a structure within the architecture of consciousness and non-locality where everything can be known, past, present, future, because it's embedded within the structure of the consciousness field. It's in every one of you. You don't have to go anywhere. This is a really critical part of this holistic technique for remote viewing. I don't particularly recommend the ones that have been military-based. The so-called, the scientific remote SRV. I like the approach where you develop the understanding and experience of deep consciousness, understand that consciousness is omnipresent, and that at a quiet level of the mind, when you're deeply quiet, you can enter into this field of consciousness. You want to be able to experience that state of consciousness and then relax into it and let it flow through you, and then the answer will be there. The answer will just come. Now, there are many ways to do it. The meditative state, and then going deep, and then relaxing and allowing it to be seen. That's one way. Dream time. I mentioned this before you went to bed. It was getting late. I would have gone more into this. You're asleep, but as you're going to sleep, get a journal, keep something by your bedside, and begin to affirm to yourself that you can have lucid dreaming, be awake within the dream, and you can travel to places and know things in that state. You can begin to practice that on a nightly basis, and as you do it, it'll begin to go up and up and up in accuracy. So I tell people, this is walking the talk here. Every important thing in my life has been the result of the lucid dream, remote viewing, meditative state, and guidance for 40, 50 years. You don't take leave of your intellect or anything else, but you add this to it, and it creates a beautiful world and a beautiful life for you. So another approach to remote viewing is doing that in that dream state. The other is when you're going to sleep, or mostly when you're waking up. You're coming out of sleep into the waking state, but you're kind of in that drowsy, half awake, half asleep state, but you're rested. At that juncture, the junction between dream and sleep and waking, when you're relaxed, intend to know something, ask to see something, ask to have a problem solved. You will be stunned at how accurate you will become in getting that information.
The secret weapon Adolf Hitler was working on was this. Why did it go black? Because they finally figured out how to master it, and they didn't need to have more people joining in. So they wanted to close off that discussion. This is how the spy masters operate. Now, when they began to discover, and I want to put this into three categories. You have assets that are material, stagecraft, and let's call these advanced aircraft of man-made origin, all right? And I'm going to show you some. tonight, and it will blow your mind, and it should. But things like this. Man-made, anti-gravity, going all the way back to the late 50s and 60s. Triangular, disc, boomerang, etc. What you need to understand is, the gentleman I referred to and other people have confirmed of this time period to me, that around October 1954, we attained gravity control. So gravity control meaning electromagnetic systems that affect an object so it becomes seemingly weightless, levitates, and corrects for gravity. And others were using very high voltage, high frequency systems at certain hertz, cycles per second, that would cause a change in the atomic structure and the magnetic field in such a way that you could essentially cancel mass. Okay, so without boring people with a physics lesson, if you make something close to massless, no weight, but weight is different from mass, massless, then you can accelerate it at enormous speeds with very little power. And it can go right-hand turns, go up and down, and if you can control for the interior at 1G, in other words, one gravitational field, then you can go at 100,000 miles per hour, make a right-hand turn, and your brains don't come out of your ears. The secret weapon that we had was the atomic bomb. The secret weapon Adolf Hitler was working on was this. Why did it go black? Because they finally figured out how to master it, and they didn't need to have more people joining in. So they wanted to close off that discussion. So in October 1954, gravity control was mastered, and we began to build various prototypes of what the public would call UFOs. And some were made to simulate the shape, appearance, and motion of an extraterrestrial vehicle. Because what better way to confuse people than to have something that looks almost the same? Is it gold? Is it fool's gold? Is it real? Is it Memorex? Get where I'm going here? This is how the spy masters operate. So I call those the assets that are material physical craft. Now that's one category. We'll return to this. There's another category, and this is more difficult to understand, and that is electromagnetic assets. And these include electromagnetic systems that could optically, like a very advanced hologram, simulate an event. Electromagnetic systems that have been called popularly electronic warfare systems that are psychotronic and radionic, that interface with consciousness and thought. And electromagnetic systems that can affect large segments of the population when targeted. Now these began to be developed quite in an advanced fashion by the 40s and 50s. And by 1956, it had been accomplished to the point of state-of-the-art. And then the other asset, the third category, is human intelligence, human assets. And these are folks who, some wittingly, some unwittingly, have been provided with a script and experiences that they honestly believe are real, but that have been programmed and are like very advanced consciousness holographic experiences. If you will, electronic hallucinations.
Friends, let me listen carefully. Anyone listening, do not think you're going to be off the radar of the sector of the Intelligence Committee working tasked with this issue. No level of encryption, no level of patents, no level of spy versus spy talking in gibberish code over a phone is going to frustrate their knowing everything you're doing in real time. And the only protection there is strategic protection, which is massive disclosure and public transparency of everything you are doing. The quickest way to get killed doing this stuff is to do it secretively. If you do it in full view, you're completely safe. Why? Because the people who are in these covert programs, the last thing they want to do is be caught red-handed in a wet works operation. Wet works are assassinations. A wet works operation with the whole world watching. That's why I'm still alive. We have to figure out how to move this, or I have to pass this on to a generation, because, I won't be around for more than another 30 or 40 years. But we need people to understand what the sciences are, because this is the biggest change in the history of the human race. Every CEO and high-tech person and billionaire I've met with wants to do the technology, monetize it, have patents, keep it secret, do the R&D in secrecy, like you're developing another piece of rubbish like this cell phone. It's just junk. It's of no real significance at all. Not going to change the world. It's a telephone that you can talk on, like in the early 1900s, except it's wireless, using the same frequencies of a radio or what have you. It's nothing. It's nothing. Trillions of dollars into nothing. So the paradigm of doing this as a intellectual property and secret, the only way you're going to get that out is if you convince this other hardcore element within the intelligence community and corporate world that they should give up thousands of trillions of dollars of asset-based utilities and coal and oil so that this happens, and they don't want to do that. And believe me, Bill Gates can't take on this multi-trillion-dollar element. Bill Gates has no money at all compared to these guys. What can take them on? The masses of people knowing about it. The lab doing it is live streamed on the internet. It's done fully open source. And the instant you hit the sweet spot in the resonant frequencies of a free energy device, the entire world knows it, and dozens of academic centers reproduce it in real time. You squeeze the toothpaste out of the tube so hard and so fast, no one can put it back in, and the whole world knows about it at each step. Do you want to know how ETs make things? Should we get into that? Because this is actually a consciousness-assisted technology. This microphone and all this stuff we cut down a tree for this. The metal was dug out of the earth, Neanderthal-like, and smelted down and made into metal, and then it's riveted together in bolts and screws. Transdimensional interstellar civilizations, which means the ones that are here and have exceeded the speed of light, have mastered the sciences of transdimensional manufacturing. To wit, they are able to create a standing resonant sonic energy field that is almost like an architectural blueprint of something, like 3D printing, but this is like 4 or 5D printing. Get it? And in that resonant field, then materialize the object, the spacecraft, the piece of clothing, from the transdimensional interface, energetic interface, with the subatomic space-time matter, so that the molecules, the atoms, the structures, everything in that is coming through into this dimension of 3D from that deeper interface, from another dimension, an energy field, and it just materializes it. Now, the word materializes, no one thinks what that means. It's to make material, but you're assembling it from these elementals. I call them the elementals that are subatomic, and then way in past the even 0 point energy field, which is infinite energy, as Tesla said. But in that pluripotent state, you can recruit pure gold, pure platinum, iron, any metal, and biologicals, what have you. So you can then manifest that. I'm trying to articulate something that's a very advanced science in lay terms so that you can follow it. But going back to this concept of consciousness-assisted technology, so if you're connected and you see what you want to manifest, you can connect to a technology that creates this resonant and sonic, deep sonic field that then materializes that object. So not initially, but say, I don't know how many years into the future, we're not even going to need to be having mining operations or manufacturing or anything that damages the earth. It will simply be this kind of high-tech 4D, 5D manufacturing. Forget 3D manufacturing. Look at it this way. Does everyone know what the internet is? You know how it came about? No, it was an Al Gore. It was DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration, and the Department of Defense developed it. By the way, they still run it, own it. But the internet, which is really very open source, everyone can get online for free, right? Or you pay a subscription. But the internet itself is free. So what I'm trying to have these folks understand is let's do this as in place of DARPA, because the government is not going to do this ever. Therefore, there is no equivalent of a DARPA to do this for us. Therefore, let us create our own organization and entity that takes the place of DARPA to create this open source, 0-point free energy platform where it's shared openly. And then that same group would then be able to take that knowledge and do all the thousands of vertical and horizontal applications. This thing, you use it for a little while, it's dead. What if it had a miniaturized EPE, solid state system in it, and there was no battery in it, or a tiny little one, just as sort of a discharging release of energy? It never has to be plugged in. Your PC never has to be plugged in. Your refrigerator is manufactured, ships from the factory with a motor. It has a motor in it now, but the ZEEP is a 0-point energy motor. But the basic energy source and how it works needs to be open source. Does this make sense to folks? Just like the internet is open source. And I'm trying to convince people who are high net worth CEOs, individuals, and also inventors to leave behind this spook model of keep it an intellectual property, have it a trade secret, we'll be so cute, we're going to outfox the secret government, we're going to take the patent for it and divide it into 100 patents and they won't know what we're doing. By the time you've had that thought and it's emanated from your cortex, classified projects know that's what you're going to do. And I'm not kidding. Because they have technologies that are at that level of spyware. What I want to share tonight is personally very difficult. And the reason it is that this issue and this presentation will be the most difficult one I've done in 26 years. I'm accustomed to giving folks bad news. So this is very, very bad news. And I'm not saying that to be at all melodramatic. I'm telling you what the truth is. And the only reason I'm doing this is that there have been information coming in, pinging my system, indicating that we're getting closer to the hoaxing of events to stampede the world into something that would make and look like a picnic. And there are a number of signs that have been mounting on this issue over the last 6 to 9 months. And I'm gravely concerned about it. My philosophy has always been an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Because if we can do what we should tonight and get the word out about this, there's a chance we can avoid what I'm going to be discussing. So it's a bit like if you were to tell someone they have some signs for a massive heart attack and it's imminent and you can do some things right now, prevent it. You can ignore it and have it and have a code blue where the heart stops and you have to be resuscitated. My goal here, using that medical analogy a little further, is to avoid the attack. And in this case, it would not be a medical emergency. It would be a national security and global emergency orchestrated by people who have been planning this since the 1950s. So what I'm going to be discussing is what in the parlance of the Pentagon, CIA, counterintelligence programs is known as a false INW, or a deceptive INW, or indication and warning. And some years ago, I had a meeting with the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency and General Patrick Hughes. And the focus of that briefing, which was quite extensive, was to give him information so that he would not be deceived in the event of a false or deceptive INW, indication and warning. And so you have people who often, you would think, who would have knowledge of these issues. And it turns out they do not. And then there are other people who should have nothing to do with something this sensitive, who are running the projects outside constitutional oversight of the president, the Congress, and their appointees, and of we, the people, most importantly. I want to be really clear that when this I'm sharing is, I would not do it if I didn't think it could be avoided. I would just keep my mouth shut and retire. I think
we can avert this. I think that we can avoid the heart attack, as it were, using the analogy I used earlier. And that's why I'm standing here before you. Otherwise, I would have given up on this in 1994 when I first learned of all of these issues. I have a gentleman who was the third highest ranking man at the Naval Research Labs, who prior to in the Vice President's office saw all the plans prior to it occurring. He's deceased, since I'm talking about it now. I did not talk about it for years. And he was told, I used to stay at my home. He said, look, I was told my wife and my children, my grandchildren would be killed along with me if I ever mentioned this. Now, the mother lode, the sort of the crown jewel of that kind of event is what has been planned assiduously since the 1950s. And that is a threat that would unite the world around a military junta, militarism, that would put all of humanity together, but against one or more extraterrestrial races. Everyone thought, well, we're going to learn that lesson in Vietnam. We forgot it. We had Iraq. We forgot it. So they let a certain amount of time goes by, the population becomes complacent, we have a very short-term memory on such things, and then they move another one forward. Now that plan, which they came up with in the 1950s, has been very carefully rolled out. And I was asked today by a gentleman I was meeting with, he says, when do you think they might do this? I say they began in 1950 something. It's already happened. It's already happened. The false flag has already happened. Now, not the crescendo moment, not the final act, all right? But acts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever, have already transpired. What do I mean by that? What I mean is, these operations figured out that the psychological warfare value of the subject was such that they could set up events that are completely hoaxed, beginning in the 50s and 60s, that would convince people that those events were of extraterrestrial origin, alien, when they were not. And so blur the lines between the actual ET activity and the human stagecraft, as it's called, that most people, including people at the White House, wouldn't know the difference. The problem is certainly not UFO subculture, and certainly not the media. No one in government I know, for the most part, has a clue. Even mid-level people, functionaries within the majority intelligence committee, MAGIC, M-A-J-I-C, that runs these operations, do not know about this. This is why Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter, the first CIA director when it was formed in 1947, took the place of the OSS, said in a letter that the secrecy surrounding UFOs was a threat to the national security. This is why Eisenhower said the secrecy, unwarranted secrecy is what he said, it could be a threat to our democracy and our way of life. And they were referring to this dynamic. But the problem is, in that vacuum of secrecy, extreme, illegal, unacknowledged special access projects, which is what they're called, at a compartmented level, and I was talking to a gentleman today about this, at least 21 levels, compartments, past the level of the president. 21 levels. That you have a permanent infrastructure that has evolved or spun off from the legitimate government, but that is embedded within the corporate sector, the intelligence community, and the military sector, that is run amok viciously of our liberties and our freedoms. And we'll get into this also. This gets into some issues that are going to make me very unpopular with some folks. I don't care. And we don't have time for that. I don't care if you like me, love me, hate me. People got to know the truth on this.
The UFO Channel is asking the public to send in their UFO, UAP videos to be displayed on the UFO Channel. With your contribution, you will be helping us bring full disclosure from the government about the alien presence on Earth. Don't forget to write a comment, and don't forget to push the like and subscribe buttons for the UFO channel. Regardless of what any publication or anyone says, only the truth matters.